Good afternoon, everyone. I am Emily Akhtarzandi, Managing Director of Atlantic Live, and I'd like to welcome you to this session on behalf of the Atlantic and the Aspen Institute. Energy in a carbon-constrained world. How do you build a portfolio in the future? I have the pleasure to introduce our moderator, Andrew Ross Sorkin, financial columnist for the New York Times and co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box. Before we begin, if everyone could silence your phones, that would be great. And without further ado, Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for being here. We are hopefully going to have a terrific conversation over the next hour, and we do want to make it as interactive as we can about the future of energy. And we have an illustrious group on the panel, each coming at this, I imagine, we will see actually, from a different perspective. But let me just introduce everybody, and then we'll get right into it. And of course, we will try to bring you guys into the conversation as much as possible, too. Tom Fanning right here is the chairman, CEO, and president. You get all three titles?
I do.
Of Southern Company. Roger Sant is the co-founder and chair. You only get two titles out of this.
Yeah, I only got two, and I gave up one of those.
Of AES. And then we have Chris Hostetter on the end. He's the Group VP of Strategic Planning at Toyota. And you may actually have some very different views because we have two energy companies and then a car company. I want to start with this. You come to a place like the Aspen Institute, and there's almost an acceptance, and I am one of those people who accepts the science as what it is, and that we're all looking to try to reduce carbon, and that we're trying to think about climate change and all of this. That seems to be the, and there may be people in this room who don't agree with that, but that seems to be the sort of stated sense that I've gotten over the past several years that I've been coming here. I want to read something to, and I'm going to start with Tom actually, but I can read it to everybody here. It is a political, this is a policy issue, which is this Jeff Toobin from The New Yorker. He just wrote this last week. He says, it's virtually impossible, and by the way, this is hopefully going to lay the, sort of set the table for our whole discussion about the future of energy and carbon and everything else. He says, it's virtually impossible to find any leading Republicans, including potential presidential candidates, who will agree without equivocation, agree on all these points, that temperatures are rising, that human beings are causing it, and that the nation and the world must take action to address it. Do you agree with Mr. Toobin? And the reason I ask this is because we need to get a sense of agreement on what we're even trying to conquer before we have the conversation itself.
Fabulous. You want me to start?
Yes, sir.
So,
you're in a Republican state, so I'm starting with you.
Well, wait a minute. We're all over the place. We're in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Panhandle of Florida, Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, California, North Carolina, a variety of other places. Here's the deal. Southern Company is doing more to address the issue of carbon than anybody in our industry. We are building the full portfolio. You hear this thing called all the above? Southern Company is the only company in the United States doing all the above. We're leading the renaissance of new nuclear in America. We've developed our own technology to produce energy out of coal with a carbon footprint less than natural gas. We've shifted from coal to natural gas. We're one of the leaders in renewables, particularly photovoltaics. We're leading in energy efficiency. We're the only company in our industry doing proprietary, robust research and development. For example, on this issue, Southern Company runs the nation's only carbon capture research center on behalf of DOE. Here's my point. Rather than engage in the rhetoric of the issue, Southern Company has taken the stated position of dealing not with the argument, dealing with the solution to the argument. And nobody is doing more. My position is, let's figure out a way to create a robust energy portfolio for the future with all of these constraints, balancing clean, safe, reliable, affordable for the benefit of the families we're privileged to serve.
Let me just push you and try to nail you down. Do you agree with the argument then? Are you accepting the argument because you agree with it, or are you accepting the argument for other reasons? I don't think I've ever heard you actually say that you believe that there is true climate change.
And in fact, we got into this, I guest hosted Squawk Box with Andrew and Joe and the crowd a week ago Monday. Right. And we got into this off camera, so I knew this was coming. I don't even get into the argument. Andrew, honestly, what we do, we realize it's an important issue. We understand and have been doing it for years before. Hang on. Before it became sexy. Right. We incorporated things like cost of carbon into our planning processes. So we account for every bit of this, okay? And therefore, we're the only ones in the United States in this industry committed to doing something about it. And that's what we do. I think it's much more important for us to develop solutions, not engage in the rhetoric. It is clear to me this administration will drive us to doing something about it. Southern Company is already way ahead of the curve. One more statistic just for fun times at cocktail hour today. Southern Company, a little bit smaller than the nation of Australia, okay, but about the same size from an energy production standpoint, has reduced our carbon footprint from 2005, 26%. Way exceeds anything that you would have seen out of Waxman Markey or anything else. So my credentials are, we're the foundation of the solution. I don't know that I'm going to help the argument by wading into it. Let's develop solutions. We're doing it.
Okay. I'm taking away from that he actually doesn't believe it, but
that's your opinion,
that's because he hasn't answered it. Roger, where do you stand? You're obviously very involved with wind, as is Tom, so I don't want it. It's complicated.
I am really unambiguous about it. I think it's the #1 issue facing mankind. And I think the task we have ahead of us, if we're going to follow the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to get to 80% reduction from 90 levels by 2050, we've got a real job ahead of us. And I think I see a way for us to get that, but I have absolutely no question that it's a risk that we've got to address. You know, maybe we don't know exactly how it's going to come out. I'm fine with that. No one's going to argue that putting more carbon dioxide in the air is good. Well, maybe there will be, but I haven't heard that yet. So I think it is the #1 issue that we have to face, and that's why the carbon constrained title of this panel is so critical. It is a carbon constrained world, and whether we like it or not, if there's no Republican support, the Clean Air Act is providing, the Supreme Court has given the Clean Air Act the ability to be used by EPA, both in increasing the miles per gallon of cars, which I want you to talk about, because we have to get to 55 miles per gallon at 2025, and that's part of the Clean Air Act. And that's what EPA doing. We also have the new EPA regulations on existing power plants, which I applaud. I think they went about it in the most generous and thoughtful way they could, and created all the flexibility they could for those of us that run power plants to achieve the goal.
Okay, I want to get into all that in a moment. You may have different views on that, I don't know. But from Toyota's perspective, and we just came from another panel that was Toyota related, around new vehicles, and specifically they have a very cool car out there, and I'll plug it myself, for a new hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. What is driving that technology for you? Meaning, and is it an answer to this question?
So I'd say there are two things that are driving it. I think foremost in our mind is a global issue, that when you look at the growing middle class around the world, and if you have 1 billion more people driving cars in the next 20 years from India and China, what will that do to the overall situation? So to have sustainable mobility for us is an urgent issue, because we not only have to make it cleaner for what we're driving, we have to make it cleaner for what we expect them to add to the equation. We do work closely with the governments, the state of California and the Northeast, and Germany and Japan. They all share the 80% reduction by 2050. So it takes about 20 years to turn over a car. So we interpret that by 2030, our whole lineup will probably be electric, fuel cell, hybrid, plug-in hybrid. They'll all be electrified. And so it's what portion of that? And so today we're here saying that we really see a bright future in fuel cells. They could be cheaper to build long term. The National Academy of Sciences has said that. By 2030, 2025, they can be cheaper than today's engines. So how do we prepare for the hydrogen expansion we see coming in the 20s is really why we're here.
You know what else is important in your sector, though, is all the off-road stuff. One of the things we've led in, again, here on a carbon issue, is supplanting diesel-fueled kind of cranes in the major ports of the Southeast, Savannah, Mobile, the major airports, Hartsfield, Birmingham, where we've displaced something like 7 million gallons of diesel fuel a year with electric kind of support equipment. That's really important. When we talk about the whole portfolio of power generation, It really goes to transportation sector and a variety of other things.
Well, our portfolio will also do a fuel cell bus, which we haven't talked about, but that's a later introduction.
You bet.
Fuel cell buses are a great application. They're big in Germany, they're big in Japan. Fuel cell forklifts are happening dramatically. And the next generation Airbus will actually have a fuel cell on board. So they're putting hydrogen at airports now, getting ready for that.
I don't know if we admitted to you that we both own Teslas.
That's a step in the right direction, but your next one.
It's a fabulous car.
Roger, you are supportive of what the president just announced in terms of the new rules. I want to read you someone who is not nearly as supportive. This coming from Murray Energy. You know this company. They are a big coal generator in Ohio. They say,
Coal producer.
A coal producer, rather. We will take all available measures to obtain expedited judicial review of these illegal actions and to combat these fundamentally flawed and economically devastating cap and tax mandates. Do you agree with Murray or do you agree with the president?
Are you asking me?
No, I was going to go to Tom.
I thought you were asking Roger too.
You can chime in. I imagine you disagree.
No, I made very clear where I stand.
Right.
So here's the issue, I think, you're talking about the new GHG rules that are just now. So here's the deal, 1,600 pages, we're still digesting everything. I think the argument is going to go to this. It is absolutely clear, Roger, you're right. The Supreme Court has given the authority to the EPA to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, certainly from new standards and new sources. And then there is this question about what do you do about existing sources. And then there was this recent ruling from the Supreme Court that dealt with what is the scope of EPA in dealing with some of those issues. There was a 5-4 decision also concerning this. Here's kind of, I think, where the crux of the matter will be. You have to add together Supreme Court decision plus Federal Power Act. And the question will go to this. It is indisputable that the EPA has the ability to regulate stationary sources with greenhouse gases. No question about it. The question that I think will be discussed in months to come, and we're going to have to tear apart this 1,600-page rule, really goes to the EPA's authority to usurp what is otherwise a state issue traditionally for things like economic dispatch of energy. That means delivering to customers the cheapest form of energy. For the EPA to decide on states' behalf what level of renewables they should have. Typically that's been a state issue, not a federal issue. And then the whole notion of cap and trade. There is a provision in this proposed rule where they say you've got to run gas combined cycle units at 70% capacity factor. Well, who came up with that? One more issue that was actually dealt with in the 5-4 decision out recently is what is the ability of EPA to deal with requiring energy efficiency reductions or increases, but actually a reduction in demand as a mean of compliance. See,
so, where do you stand on this issue? It sounds to me like your view is that this should be a states' rights issue, and that you are not necessarily. I don't want to say you're not a fan of the EPA, but that.
No. I don't. Listen, let's be very clear about the EPA. Southern Company has engaged with the EPA for decades, and we've had a very constructive relationship. We continue to have a constructive relationship. In fact, I just talked with Gina McCarthy about 2 weeks ago, and she thanked us for being kind of level-headed and thoughtful, and taking a reasonable approach here. I think it is. I admit that the EPA has this authority to deal with stationary sources. There's going to be a very interesting argument as to how we go forward. The other thing you should know, the issue, managing carbon in the United States economy, is without question an important issue. We're doing more than anybody about it. So when you say whether I agree or disagree, that's almost not even germane. Nobody's doing more. Let me give you one more factoid. One more factoid.
The floor is yours.
48% of the families we are privileged to serve, this is an important issue, make less than $40,000 a year. And when you think about the troubles of frozen government and everything else, my responsibility as CEO of Southern Company and Congress is to provide for a balance of clean, safe, reliable, affordable energy. Those families make tough kitchen table economic decisions every day. What they want is a better place for their kids to live, better food on the table, better medical care, better education. We can't let a single silo issue override the need to balance public policy, clean, safe, reliable, affordable. In my view, the only entity that can do that in America today is Congress.
Not the EPA, then.
So can I take the other
Please.
side a little bit?
Yes.
Please.
I was trying to set this up.
Okay. First of all, I think EPA gave all the rights to the states. They said each state has to come up with an implementation plan to say how you're going to achieve these outcomes. And they set goals for each state depending on what the state was generating at that point. So Indiana, with mostly coal, is going to get a lower target than a state like California that has very little coal, has in fact none. So I think they've done everything they could to try to give the states as much authority and power to set this the right way and in a flexible way. They've even given states the chance to work together to achieve these results, which is remarkable in my mind. So you're talking about the issue, the Clean Air Act's been around since 1970. We've resolved a lot of those issues over time. We started to regulate SO2 in 1970. We're now down to 20% of what we were at that time, with the economy growing 3.5 times. This is not something we haven't had some experience working with. So they're using the same philosophy, I think, to treat carbon, which the Supreme Court told them they should. And so I think we're in great space right now.
So Roger, the only question I would have is, and it's really simple questions. Where did the EPA come up with a target for Georgia that says X% of your generation must be renewable? Where did they have the wherewithal to decide that?
But that's why we have a comment period, you know?
Okay, but is that the authority of the EPA?
Well,
okay, I'll give you one more, which I think is even more important. The notion that they want to set a broad demand destruction goal of 1.5% per year, okay? Think about how the human element is improved by using more energy. When I think about energy efficiency, I am absolutely convicted that we should all be good stewards of what we consume. Hands down, I'll stop. That does not mean use less. To the extent you are more efficient and you're doing the same thing, you will use less. But when I think about the ability to live in a better place and eat better, get better medical care, and better education, my sense is you will use more. As standard of livings rise, you will use more. And so my take on energy efficiency is this. We should use less where we can, but we should use more where we should. The Southeast United States is one of the growing economies in America where even net of energy efficiency, demand for electricity is growing. Left out of the regulations, Roger, are issues like displacing diesel fuel, even in automobiles, transportation, displacing diesel fuel in ports. It's not accounted for in this energy reduction goal. I think those are the details in these 1,600 pages that we're going to have to get through.
And that's why we have a comment period.
Chris, I see you're either writing notes or you're doodling. I thought it was actually pretty interesting, so I hope it's not. You want to jump in on this?
I was just trying to remember what I might say.
I apologize for pushing.
No. So I think our industry is probably further down the line in terms of these issues because we already have a zero emissions vehicle mandate. We do feel that mobile sources have been treated differently than stationary sources. So in one sense, this is a little bit of catching up because we've been targeted with higher CO2 reduction. I'm not saying that's fair or unfair, it's a reality. I think what we would like to start talking about is in California, it's the renewables. And we're trying to have a non-carbon discussion. And what are we going to do to start talking about those non-carbon fuels? Okay, so and if there was carbon trading, sure. You know, you could have hydrogen that would cost as much that would be carbon-free as hydrogen that could come from CNG. So how do we start motivating those carbon-free fuels to make them more cost-effective? Because the reality is we're going to need a lot of hydrogen. And the sooner we understand how to make it from wind and solar, the Germans are really active in trying to make hydrogen from their wind resources and store it in caverns. and then have access to it for either their natural gas or their cars or their industry. So they see that as an energy storage medium. So one of the questions I have, which is not my job, is energy storage is going to be a fascinating intersection of our industry.
Let me ask you a question related to that then. Elon Musk has said repeatedly that he is not a believer in hydrogen, which you know, hydrogen fuel cells, and more importantly says that by having these battery-powered Tesla vehicles, that he imagines that they will be used to actually take energy off the grid during periods when we're all sleeping, effectively, and they become storage units unto themselves. Is that make that product a more attractive long-term solution than the hydrogen fuel cell?
So when you ask the national lab, like the Renewable Energy Lab, and so I asked them, what do they see the storage mechanisms are? Are they molten salts? Are they pumped water? Are they batteries? Are they hydrogen? You know, there is work that has yet to be done in that area. So I think he may be coming to a conclusion that the lithium-ion battery is the best solution, but I think there has to be more discussion before you arrive at that conclusion. From the scientists we have at Toyota, their chart looks at how long you can store the energy. In hydrogen, you can store that energy as a gas for a long time. If you store it in a battery, it degrades after 2 or 3 days. And then you have the issues for how fast you can have the energy available if you need it for grid maintenance or grid interaction. So there might be several fuels and several ways to maintain the integrity of a new electrical grid. But in Germany, they set the record. 60% last fall, that week of electricity was produced by renewables. And that changes their whole business.
Well, Germany had huge feed-in tariffs that supported that. I think this issue of storage is the most important issue around energy right now. We talk about the disruptive nature of distributed generation and everything else. Not really, I don't think, around the edges. I think storage is. Lithium-ion, and I couldn't agree with anything more you said. Lithium-ion batteries are a really important solution. Elon Musk making a huge bet on that. There's going to have to be future development in order for this all to work well, unless prices rise dramatically. Southern Company developed some of our research and development on these issues. One of the things you think about energy is scale. The micro solutions like batteries in a car or even fuel cell, or hydrogen, sure. They'll all have some solutions. Solutions at scale, we'll say, and one of the things we're working on is think about the Earth as a storage site. Think about the Earth as a battery. And maybe what we can do, see my friend down here, is take negatively priced wind at night off of Texas, push it into the ground, compressed air energy storage, put a turbine on the top of it, take it out in capacity strips at 4 and 6 hours during the peak part of the day, and now you got something. Pump storage hydro has been around for a while. I think it's due for a resurgence. Storage is going to be, I think, the disruptive thing in the energy space in the future.
Okay, well, let's talk specifically about some of these technologies, and you referenced wind, and then you referenced the idea that these wind turbines, it's negatively priced, you know, in the middle of the night.
That's right.
I imagine one of the reasons it's negatively priced is, in fact, because of all of the subsidies that are related to the business.
Yeah.
You have bought into wind in a very big way as well. Does it work without the subsidy? And if it doesn't work now, when will it?
Me? Roger?
I'll go to Roger and come back to you.
Okay.
You know, I first want to make the point that the mistake we shouldn't make is think there's a silver bullet. You know, I think all of us would agree that every solution we've looked at is a multitude of solutions. So the people who used to think nuclear was the answer learned quickly it was not the answer. It could be part of an answer.
That's right.
I think even you building 2, which is the only place that's going on, would say that. So I think let's start in a context that there's a multitude of answers. There's no silver bullet. I think wind really has a role that has had to have subsidies in order to get to where it is, but I think it's competitive now. It has some pluses and minuses.
Without the subsidy.
Without the subsidy. And I think the same thing will soon be true of solar. And so I think we're pretty close, and I think it's really driven technology development just the way we ought to do it. Subsidies ought to drive development and to get out of the way. And I think that's just about where we are at this point.
Tax policy can help you innovate and start things up. The renewables industry, in my opinion, is mature and shouldn't have those kinds of subsidies.
Should not have those kinds.
Should not. And I take advantage of them as well as everybody else in that industry. We're the largest voluntary solar program in the United States, voluntary solar program in Georgia. I forget where the numbers are now. We used to be the 5th largest solar owner in the United States. We're probably a little bit less than that now just because of the way the numbers add up. But still, we take advantage of these things. Here's my view. EIA, Energy Information Administration's own data shows that on a per unit basis, so this is per barrel of oil, per therm, however you want to say it, wind and solar get 100 times the per unit tax preference items than does coal, oil, and gas, 35 times nuclear. Without those subsidies, it is clear to me that they would not have the place they have. Please hear me, though. I think renewables are really important. I think they're wonderful for America, but I think it's time to let them stand on their own. We don't need tax policy to pick winners and losers.
For his hydrogen fuel cell to work out in a meaningful way,
right,
we're going to need hydrogen stations all across the country. Mm-hmm. Would you be an advocate of the government subsidizing? And they're doing it, by the way, in California.
Yeah, you bet.
Would you be an advocate of them subsidizing that type of production?
The United States government, so one of the other things we've talked about with you and others before is tax policy. I absolutely favor comprehensive tax reform. In other words, I think if we try and fight this Byzantine land war of every rule and regulation, you'll never get there. And so I've supported in the past things like Simpson-Bowles and Baucus Camp.
You wouldn't have any of these subsidies anymore.
Well, and I'm in favor of that. Here's what I think we should do, is we should go to the whiteboard approach, take this stuff away, and then go through an exercise of figuring out what you really need to add back to benefit Americans. That would be my approach. I don't think we need the degree of tax subsidies we do. Here, wait, one more thing, and then I'll shut up, Roger. If you look at a graph, it's called an S-graph in research and development. It starts out low, and then it goes up, a big scale up, and then it kind of flattens out. The 3 regions of that curve are the bench research that is best done by universities and to a lesser extent the government. And the government actually does a pretty good job here. As you go up the curve, that is your scale up, and that's what Southern Company does really well and uniquely well. And then you get commercialization. So the government should play on the very deep bench research.
But not on the subsidization. Roger.
So the real answer to subsidies is to put a price on carbon. That's where we really get it. We've been dealing with subsidies that try to move this along or that along, and that's really difficult to do. If we put a price on carbon today, everybody has a level playing field, and we not only penalize the polluters, that is the people who are getting the carbon emissions, but it provides the incentive for all of the other people who are developing clean technologies. So his hydrogen car will benefit greatly by having a price on carbon. And we tried various ways of doing that, and it comes back to your question, could you get a Republican to support that? I think the way you could do that if you did it in the context of tax policy. And I think the Democrats, on the other hand, would say, look, if you guys would give us a carbon tax, forget the regulation. So you've got the beginnings of a deal here, I think. And a carbon tax or a price on carbon is the one thing we're missing now to provide that incentive. If this really is a risk, the risk ought to be priced. And therefore, even if it's revenue neutral, even if we reduce payroll taxes and say it doesn't do anything for the deficit, it still sends a signal that carbon emissions are harmful and we're worried about them and we want to do something about it.
Okay, hold on for half a second. Does Toyota have a view on pricing carbon?
Probably depends on where the benefits of the carbon pricing go. So does the vehicle get the benefit if it's a fuel cell, or does the, because somebody's building these hydrogen stations. So where will the carbon tax benefit go?
You're getting your hydrogen from water. It's not going to be carbon taxed.
We don't have a retailing system that provides it. So I'm not sure I'm not as knowledgeable about as these gentlemen in the intricacies of carbon. Right. My goal is to try and get people to recognize that the vehicle we have on display and the one we have for you to drive, the one we have for you to drive goes 440 miles. It produces water vapor. Hydrogen isn't more energy dense than battery. It's as good as you can get. this is as ideal as we will be in our business to becoming environmentally sustainable. We've been through many experiments, methanol, ethanol, CNG. So this is it. So we're really looking for people to become serious about supporting this in some way, because this is, there's nothing beyond it. Right. And we're being asked to supply a lot of vehicles to meet these mandates, and so we're worried about the capacity investments and all the infrastructure investments that take years to do.
Tom, you pricing carbon?
No. Here's the issue. When we're thinking, and I also co-chair.
We agree that we should have a Tesla. We do agree on that.
And I love Roger too. He's a wonderful guy. So I mean, this is nothing. This is what makes Aspen great, that we can have these kinds of conversations, right? I want to return to something. I co-chair at the Business Roundtable, along with Dave Cody of Honeywell, the North American Energy Security Plan. And in fact, the kind of tagline of that would be that energy security, if we're perhaps a net exporter by 2020, doesn't mean we're energy independent, it means we're secure. And by 2030, 35, maybe we can be the biggest energy producer on the globe. And all of a sudden, we have changed the conversation of energy from policy set on scarcity to policy set on abundance. And a variety of people have talked about the benefits to the United States economy of rejecting this notion of a new normal where unacceptably high unemployment, slow economic growth is what we should be satisfied with. America can do better. Energy policy is one of the ways that can lead us forward and allow Americans to play offense in otherwise this challenged environment, frozen government, whatever you want to call it. Here's the deal. When you think about tax policy, you're right, Roger, you could structure a variety of tax mechanisms that could net out to be kind of neutral, and you're just shifting from one thing or another. When I think about the benefits of adding 2 to 3% to GDP, adding 3 million jobs by the end of the decade, when I think about the benefits of creating an unassailable advantage in manufacturing and growing jobs and growing personal incomes, my objective function, I absolutely believe that carbon is important. But it is not the only objective function here. If I can increase the standard of living and increase the prospects of the United States economy to float all boats and help especially those families that are most constrained by an inflexible energy budget, and carbon tax would be the most regressive thing we could do in America. I don't think that's what's right. There's a lot of things we could do in America before we start taxing growth opportunities. Energy gives us, in an international environment, the ability to grow and beat other people in the international economy.
Roger, why is Tom wrong?
You know, you're not even taking into account the cost of inaction. If a carbon tax now would save us the cost of inaction in the future, it's the best cost-benefit thing we've ever done. And my sense is that we're just beginning to see the possible consequences of not acting. And so if we could do anything now, and particularly if we could do it on a revenue-neutral basis, it's going to make a huge amount of difference, and we'll lead the world. I think we're leading the world at this point, but I think we can do a lot more in that direction. So you're not going to lose those kind of jobs. You're trading off a carbon tax for something like payroll tax. Payroll tax is taxing a good. Carbon tax is taxing a bad, and you know that better than I.
So let me just throw out, I never said we're not dealing with carbon. I said don't tax it. There are carrots and sticks in tax policy. I would rather see carrots made to play here. In other words, without burdening further the United States economy with new taxes, let's create a transition plan for the generation fleet of America where by 2050 we achieve these objectives without higher taxes. Look at what Southern Company has done. New nuclear, coal technology, we've shifted 70% coal to 35% coal, 16% natural gas, 45% natural gas. We did that without a carbon tax. Do you want to know we have the largest voluntary solar program in Georgia? We did that without a requirement for a renewable portfolio standard. We don't need more government in the way adding gunk in the engines of commerce.
Okay. I want to go to questions in just a minute, but I want to get through two technologies which we have not really touched on. We briefly mentioned solar and I just want to get the state of it. And I want to actually have a car question. I remember years ago, you'd see these videos of what a car was going to look like in the future, and on the roof of the car was a solar panel, and that's what was going to actually provide energy to the car. Is that ever a reality?
It depends on if you want to let your car sit in the sun all day and how long you want to drive it. You know, there's a friend of mine who took a sports car, took the engine out, and it's a 2000 GT, and it only operates on solar. Yeah. So he can't do a lot of laps around the track, but yeah, he's a dedicated solar car. On the other hand, we put solar panels on our Prius, and we do that to run the ventilation system in the heat. So it lowers the interior temperature by 30 degrees, and you're not using your air conditioning when you turn on. So that's about the level of power that you can get on that site. We can't get enough, you don't have enough square inches.
Is solar always going to be that limited?
On the roof of a car?
Oh, the roof of a car?
Yes.
On the roof,
yeah. The roof of the car is not big enough to drive the car.
It's going to help, though.
It'll help. It helps keep the temperature down.
I had a
we do it as to help the accessories, but it's not sufficient to drive the vehicle 300 miles with one day charge.
But you know what is exciting about solar, especially photovoltaics? You know, we're all focused on air. I think water is the issue of the future. I really think it's going to get bigger and bigger. But I've always been excited about PVs, much more so than wind and a variety of things, because the cost of producing photovoltaics is coming way down. The efficiency still has room to have more breakthroughs. I think solar is the more important of the renewables going forward. But everything has its place. What you said is absolutely true. We need the full portfolio.
But put it on your house. Now, in focus groups, people love the idea of energy independence, that the solar on their house can power their car, and it can. So we have a community of 70 vehicles in Japan, 70 houses that's self-contained with wind and solar. They don't have any outside power coming in, and we have a whole management software. So we're creating sustainable communities.
Let me just give a little personal
based
story.
upon
We
that,
just
but
installed,
not on the vehicle itself.
We just installed solar, so I can at least speak from personal experience. I think right now that's looking like a levelized cost of about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and our retail charge is around 13 cents. If I take all the government subsidies away, we'd probably be paying about 13 cents. So we're really at the point now, but you know, of solar really competing, and certainly reliable. You know, our experience so far is incredibly reliable.
Roger, what state is that?
Virginia.
Virginia.
Yeah. Okay, so last topic, and then we will open it up. Nuclear. You're the only ones really touching it right now.
Well, there's another company called Scana, but we're leading the renaissance.
From a policy perspective, though, and politically, has this just become the third rail? I mean, can we actually see over the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yes.
More new plants come online?
In fact, I hope we're going to be in a position where we may announce our next new project. Let me just tell you, this doesn't get reported enough. When Georgia Power, one of our subsidiaries, decided to go forward with nuclear, and it was approved by the commission, we thought rates would increase 12%. What we believe now, with the schedule we're on, with the cost we're incurring, we think that 12% increase is now going to be between 6 and 8%. Costs have come down. It is emissionless. It is safe. This is a technology, safe? It's completely safe. When you think about all of the issues that related to Fukushima, right? That was relatively old technology. When I think about Plant Vogtle, here is the difference. Fukushima operated as it should have with the earthquake. In other words, the nuclear plants tripped off. Where they got into real trouble is when the tsunami came in and essentially cut out all the external power sources, so they couldn't run the pipes and valves necessary to get the water where it needed to be during an emergency. The new technology here, let me do this here, this would be great. The new technology for the Westinghouse AP1000, AP stands for Advanced Passive, is essentially that the water sits above the reactor just like this. And in the event of a disaster, a mechanical valve, actually several mechanical valves blow, and the water goes right into the reactor. 70% less pipes, valves, and pumps. We're 130 miles inland, 220 feet above sea level. We're not going to have a tsunami or anything like that, or flooding. We're not in a seismic sensitive area. So my sense is, given the technology benefits of this newest, safest technology in the world, plus the geologic benefits, the climate benefits, it is something we must do. Is it a solution for everything? No. Is it a dominant solution in the portfolio? Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to leave the conversation there, but we're going to open it up and continue the conversation with everybody here. There's a number of hands have already gone up. Sir.
Yes, thank you. Tom, we had this discussion last year. You're only down in your emissions, CO2 emissions, because gas prices plunged, and as you said, you switched from coal to gas. Nobody can do carbon sequestration economically, which is why the government is subsidizing it. George Shultz, Hank Paulson are Republicans. They've come out for a carbon tax. Tom, why don't you get, instead of being behind the curve and fighting this rearguard action, why don't you just say, I support a carbon tax with a rebate so your 40,000 and under customers are not impacted. You talk about subsidies for everything. Coal has the biggest subsidy in the world. So it's very simple. Why do you keep fighting? Why don't you just join Exxon? All these oil companies, car companies have come out for the carbon tax.
And the gloves come off.
So long?
I'm delighted. Hey, thank you for that. I appreciate it. No, seriously. And in fact, we chatted last year, right? Absolutely. I don't believe more taxation is what this economy needs right now. I am the deputy chair of the Atlanta Fed. I'll be the chair. Sir, let me finish. I don't think we need more taxes. The United States economy is more fragile than it should be. And in fact, when you look at kind of and I talked about this on your show about a week and a half ago, the beta, if you will, if you measure beta, that's the systematic risk of a stock compared to the market. If you owned every stock in the market, your beta would be 1. If I did a time series beta of the United States economy over the last 4 to 5 years, we're up about 50%. I don't think we need to burden that economy more. What we've got to do is figure out a way to grow the economy without burdening it further. And my sense is that is not the right answer. I think we can deal with carbon. Look at what we've done already. We can deal with carbon without taxes. I am saying it's an important issue. We don't need to tax it. That's all I'm saying.
I'll take you guys to dinner later. Sir.
I, too, am a veteran of last year's conversation, and I would like to make the observation that you've spent about 30 minutes on this subject and only 1 minute, if that, on the most important part. And that is, the most important challenge in the energy world is finding a new way to store electricity. Don't necessarily call it a battery. Don't improve lithium-ion by 5% or lead sulfide by 10%. That is not going to solve the car problem. It's not going to solve the energy problem of the United States. And I have made a proposal, which Tom has read, that I sent to the President in his first term and had the opportunity to present it to the Secretary of Energy, and that is that the federal government should launch a major program to find a new way to store electricity. Call it Apollo, call it Manhattan, but instead of these little bitty subsidies all over the place on alternate energies, put it all on the major problem. Don't put 29 minutes on the minor problems, put it all on the major problems.
I think he's dead on. Thank you, Mr. Bonner.
Thank you.
I don't.
So,
that's why you couldn't get an answer to your question. You tried to say, and get these people, you tried to get all 3 of them to say, man has caused the climate change with carbon. None of them would say yes, because that's not the important question.
I said unequivocally.
You said yes? Okay, 2 to 1. But in any case, that's not the important question. The important question is, how do we solve the energy crisis, and not the issue of whether it's carbon in the air or whether you and I did it.
It's a fair and good question, but I believe for some reason Robert disagrees with you, and I want to know why.
You're totally free to make your choice about technology. I'm just saying the most important thing is to put a price on carbon, to allow those things to develop. And storage, sure, none of us will disagree, but it's not the only issue or not the most important issue in my mind. It's the matter of getting all of the things that we know of in technology to compete. And that's why I think a price on carbon is the only way to approach all of those things getting a chance.
That is the way, and the subsidies on the alternates is the way too. And I say, let the alternates fight for themselves, and science put the government money on the problem that they
Got it.
do.
And I'll take you guys to dinner too. Yes, sir.
Andrew, your initial quote, there's a phrase we haven't talked about, which is "and the world." And
the world.
And the world.
Yes.
And my question, which is on a philosophical sense, I think it's fair to ask, is I can make the case, everyone else can, that we're way ahead of the world on this. And whatever we do in a world sense is not going to be meaningful. Right. And furthermore, if that's the case, what do we do to really accomplish something that is meaningful, not because it makes us feel good, but because it solves the problems of the developing world, of China, which have incredible political resistance.
It's a tremendous question. I imagine all three men may have.
But I just think we lead like we always have. Once we lead, once we get out in front of it, we have a much better chance of getting those other countries to agree. Right? You're right. China right now is 27% of carbon dioxide emissions. The U.S. is 14%. So they've bypassed us, and all of the growth has come there.
They're going this way, and we're going this way. And I think it's a convenient answer, and you know I love you, Roger, to say that because we do it, everyone else will follow. We're seeing that isn't working in today's world. And you know, what do we do, and what do these countries do, and what do we do that in magnitude deals with their problem?
All I can tell you is I think China and the U.S. are having more discussions about this now, given what we've just done.
So this technology we developed and we're deploying in Mississippi right now that's cleaner than natural gas, and actually we use our carbon dioxide not as a waste stream but in enhanced oil recovery. We will produce, once the thing's operational, about 2 million barrels of domestic oil. Imagine that, every year. Here's the issue. We're now marketing that in China. We signed an agreement this spring with the largest coal company in China. We hope to sign another agreement in July. Think about the geopolitics of Eastern Europe, which are largely coal-based energy technologies, and then think about the geopolitics of sitting at the end of Gazprom with Vladimir Putin on the other end of that. Look, America can lead in energy innovation, and that really is something that America should adopt. It really goes to the notion of how do we deploy most effectively American resources to lead the world. Energy innovation is something we can do, and we're trying to do that. I think it's a huge issue.
Okay, let's sneak in a couple more questions. We have we have a question back here. You don't even have, I was going to say the cheap seats, but you don't even have a seat. So go ahead.
Standing room only, yeah. Hi, my name's Ben Adler. I'm a reporter with Grist, which is an environmental magazine. And I have a question for Tom, but I'd be very interested to get Roger's thoughts as well if he has any he wants to add. Tom, you talked about two types of energy that your company is moving towards and reducing CO2 emissions at the point at which you generate the energy. One is natural gas and the other is nuclear. I have questions about the other environmental implications of those two sources. On natural gas, your 25%, 26% reduction in CO2 emissions, I'm assuming does not include methane leakage upstream. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on why you think natural gas is actually better when studies are beginning to show that it might actually be net worse in terms of climate change impact. And then on nuclear, you talked about how the plant in Georgia would be less vulnerable to a natural disaster. But I'm wondering about vulnerability to a terrorist attack.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Boy, I could spend another soliloquy here. I'm going to hit it really quickly. In the Wall Street Journal, the weekend edition, about a year ago, I did one of the interviews, and the unfortunate title was The Natural Gas Skeptic. And I laid out 5 reasons why we got to be very cautious about natural gas. I'm a skeptic on everything, I think. Therefore, I'm a skeptic on nothing. I am one of the leaders in America for the full portfolio. We talk about that a lot. Here's the 5 reasons real quickly. Number 1, we do not understand, ultimately, the environmental impacts of fracking. Number 2, we got to build the infrastructure, pipelines. We got to understand firm transportation. We got to understand storage of natural gas. Number 3, I believe we should be able to export everything we can. The 3rd largest consumer of natural gas in America today, and yet I believe the United States economy is well served by unlimited exporting. Number 4, there is an enormous demand curve shift in the United States today from manufacturing, from potentially the transportation sector, my own industry, and I think that's going to increase price and volatility. I could give you statistics later if you want to see. 5, what do we do about price and volatility? There's no efficient way to hedge price and volumes over time to manage this higher beta energy economy that we're moving into in the United States. That's a big issue, all important. We got to solve those things as we move forward. Gas is not free, and I'm a believer in the full portfolio. Second issue was what?
Nuclear.
Nuclear, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so the language is important here. Originally we talked about nuclear waste, and then we went to spent fuel. The right language is used fuel. You know, there's 70 to 80% of the energy remaining in the rods we have. We have unlimited site storage called dry cask storage on our site in Plant Vogel. There are obvious solutions like Yucca Mountain, but I think the long-term right solution for the United States is reprocessing. And I think the security around the nuclear industry is outstanding.
I can be really quick. I think we ought to have federal regulation on fracking. It's just run amok. I agree completely with all of those issues, and there ought to be a regulatory limit on what they could be. On nuclear, Tom and I just disagree. I just think it's a very expensive way to boil water, and a very complicated way to boil water, and so that's what makes capitalism work. You can invest your money the way you want to, and I can invest my money, but I think there are a lot simpler ways to make electricity.
Value is a function of risk and return. When you look at the volatility of natural gas prices, if you did not have firm transportation during polar vortex 1 and 2, Citygate gas went to $133 per million BTU in New York City. It went into the 70s for long periods during the first quarter. In the Southeast, we had 100% coverage on firm transportation and storage. It still went to about $7. Nuclear will give you, without volatility, energy on a natural gas equivalent at about $1 per million BTU for the life of the plant.
Okay, we got to leave the conversation there, unfortunately, because we could do it for a much longer time. I want to thank Tom, I want to thank Roger, I want to thank Chris. Thank you for your questions and for being part of the conversation. Thank you so much.